Hi, friends. My name's host Eric. I'm the host of Talking Fence People, and welcome back to another episode of Root Cause of Civilization Collapse equals Myah. Today's scapegoat is going to be people who wear windbreakers. Note, this is not a windbreaker, okay? It's a coat. I think the real problem is causing civilization to collapse is that too many people have embraced the windbreaker. If you are part of a group of people who tends to wear windbreakers, what does that suggest? It shows how, as a civilization, we're no longer willing to commit to either a t-shirt or a parka the way we used to be. Now we're those windbreakery people. You know, it's like as soon as we started giving rights to people with windbreakers, everything started going downhill. Octavio Silva, were you the one who introduced windbreakers? It might have been Octavio Silva. Dollars 1969. I don't have any proof, but I'm going to take your word for it. Octavio Silva's to blame. Oh, sure, Bob. Son, thanks for asking him. Oh, that's right. Oh, fuck. Is there a premiere right now or something? That already happened? It already happened, right? Okay, good. I don't want to do two things at the same time. I cut my own hair. I have trimmers and I have some scissors. I cut it myself. You can still see there's a little bump right here, kind of. I'd like to maybe get that little bump a little bit better. And while I was cutting my own hair, B-Babe, Rachel was dyeing her own hair. She dyed it dark. I really like how it looks. I think it's super, super cool looking. I feel like I'm with, like Raven from Teen Titans.
Yay! I just checked and it didn't.
I just started 2 minutes ago. Today we're discussing which group is to blame, the root cause for the downfall of the civilization. And today the focus of our hatred is people with windbreakers.
Oh, people with windbreakers.
Mm-hmm. The windbreaker, it seems to me, it represents so much of when we stopped being, real men and we started being sissified. It's the overall sissification of the windbreaker that I think has caused the West to decline so much. But, I'm open to hear about whatever group you'd like to blame.
I'm trying to think of groups.
Pigeon feeders?
Oh, pigeon feeders.
Or like
the ones at the parks.
When society is robust, people don't have time to feed pigeons. When there are real civilization builders happening out there, they aren't wasting their time feeding pigeons. Pigeons are just parasites on civilization.
So did you go to the dentist or?
I did. Oh, yes. Let's talk about this.
Oh, my gosh.
I have an appointment for tomorrow at 11:15.
Okay.
So this is pretty exciting to me, actually. And I find it very slabby. Like, I'm beginning to move into, I am in the process of doing all the things I need to do to execute my campaign. And one of them was get my teeth fixed. So I'm going to have the whole left side of my mouth completely fixed, which currently has got missing teeth on the top and the bottom. And looks terrible, and also has now started causing me pain, so I had no choice but to deal with it, right? So the other thing, though, is I was driving down there, and I was reflecting that I'm going to be back at something more like 100%, because I really feel I've been operating at less than full speed for about a month because I have an on again, off again kind of low grade fever because of an affected tooth. And I suspect that when my teeth are fixed, I'm going to feel more energetic and yeah. Well, I got an appointment for tomorrow at 11:15. That's as soon as they get me in. But it's all set up, and I'm gonna get all my teeth fixed. So I'll be ready to be on camera as well. Because right now I'm only camera ready on the right side of my mouth, not on the left side of my mouth. So
that would be great for the campaign.
Right, so that's important. And
also for your health.
But most importantly, the thing that I was feeling good about this morning was recognizing that I have been pushing through not feeling well for the better part of a month now, and it's going to be nice to have that resolved. Well, what happened was yes, and this is what makes it so slabby. It hasn't been hurting badly enough that's compelled me to do anything, right? I have been just taking Tylenol, and it's been good enough. Then yesterday during the Super Bowl with Rachel and my dad sitting right there watching the game with me, it starts hurting so much that I can't hide the fact that I'm in pain. And then it all comes out, and well, now all of a sudden I got to go to the dentist, And it's funny, my dad basically scolded Rachel for not telling on me. That she was aware of it ahead of time,
Yeah, I got scolded.
So anyway,
it's okay.
That's what makes it slabby is the timing of it, Anyway, that's all in the works now, and I feel good about that. I feel a great sense of relief, really. Like, I've been worrying about that.
Too. But I see the thing is that I'm not gonna be the partner who's gonna nag you to get.
Well, it's not. See, this is the thing. He's expecting from you something equivalent to what he got from Kimberly and Candace, which is SFJ interaction. SFJs are kind of presumptuous in a way. They think their role is to be kind of like family leader, and my dad's accustomed to that from his own marriage for the last 60 years to an ISFJ. And he doesn't know what to make of you because you're an INFJ. He's not experienced. You probably remind him somewhat of his sister, but his sister is an INFJ or possibly ENFJ who is somewhat proactive in being in kind of even though she's, I believe, the younger sister, kind of big sisterly to my dad, because I think she sees his polar in eye and wants to help. But obviously you feel like you want to be respectful, right?
Yeah.
And not presumptuous. And there's a lot of challenge between a couple of intuitives like us bridging the attentional disconnect with an ESTJ.
Well, it's tough because I grew up with having an ESTJ, and my mom encouraged us to be like, take care of your own problems. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not used to being attentive to other people's needs, maybe in a way that
SI families have their own unique kind of family approach that kind of defies NI.
Yeah.
But Paul Gray asks, do you believe in God? Well, I pray to an almighty God periodically. And how do I know what I know? Which piece of knowledge would you like to know the epistemological history of?
Ooh.
Hi, Lauren Cuthbert. How are you today? Are you more Lauren or more Cuthbert? Feeling a bit more Cuthberty today, so you better stay away.
I'm feeling a little La Pelosa today.
Are
That's
you?
so weird. Yeah, I looked at my hair and it reminded me of my dad. My dad had before going gray. He had jet black hair.
As far as is it my regular dentist, the answer is I have been there before, and it's a dentist who was responsible for a lot of work about 6 years ago, which is still working fine. The right half of my mouth, but now I gotta get the left half of my mouth done. What is the mechanism of knowledge acquisition? Well, for pieces of knowledge that I attain by experience, then the mechanism of knowledge acquisition would be retaining details of those experiences. For knowledge that I acquire via, say, reading a book, then the mechanism of knowledge acquisition would be reading. Thanks, Raphael. Leaf Trimmer and Lauren walk in together looking suspicious. You're feeling more like you're feeling like custard, huh? Feeling more custard. In other words, you were really feeling the custard you had earlier. Now you're feeling what, more custard? Or you're feeling more custardy than Cuthberty. And more like camembert cheese than cheddar. So I like people like Paul. First of all, let me just say, Paul Gray, you are lucky this is not a no Paul day. We sometimes have no Paul days around here. But I like Paul Gray's. I like the sort of thing that Paul Gray's doing and being presented with opportunities to like subvert that to some extent, you know. Because what it reveals is that a lot of times we, in philosophy, we make things a lot more complicated than we should, right? So, okay, what is the non-contingency that all contingent facts are dependent upon? I mean, any given consequent is contingent on its antecedent, okay? So it is not the case that all consequents are contingent on the same antecedent. In fact, consequents are never contingent on non-contingencies. They're contingent on antecedents.
Did you speak with Jeffrey's mom?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the reason I like Paul Gray is because he came in with a strategy to elicit answer A and do something with it. And instead, my answer undermined his question entirely in both instances and revealed something more important. Like, what is the mechanism of knowledge acquisition? Well, I mean, like right now, his mechanism of knowledge acquisition is hearing my answers and processing them. What is it that provides for the intelligibility of your worldview? I mean, how do you determine whether a worldview is intelligible? what comprises an intelligible worldview to you? Use terms that are operationalizable. So it's like, what determines why I afford a given paradigm primacy over another paradigm? Is that what you're asking? I know I'm asking you what your question means. Does your question mean, how do I determine whether a given frame has primacy over another frame? I generally try not to believe things. I mean, I generally don't believe things. I don't really understand what the word believe means. I do operate under assumptions, obviously, and I affirm certain positions as more or less correct, but I recognize that words validate under two different validation metrics, one being internally and one being empirically. Neither of those. What do you mean to accept?
Excuse me?
I mean, see, you keep trying to avoid words that mean that allow us to actually test what you're saying. So, for example, if I walk down the street, I'm operating under the assumption that the sidewalk is not going to turn into liquid, right? Does that mean that I believe the sidewalk is going to remain solid? Or does it simply mean that I'm not thinking about that at all and just operating under that assumption? You can post a link. I'll add you as a moderator briefly. So, or do you mean to affirm? So, I tend not to if you mean to fail to negate something, I guess would be to accept as factor truth. So if you said to me, I went to the store yesterday and I failed to negate it, would that comprise accepting it as factor truth? You didn't post any link. I can see. But is that really part of my worldview? Or is that, yeah, there you go, Raphael, thanks. I mean, it would seem to me that matters that don't enter into your calculations at all, in other words, if you're not thinking about anything at all, the fact that I'm breathing continually doesn't mean that I believe there's air, right? But do you see what I'm saying, Paul Gray? I am breathing, right? But I don't have to believe there's air to breathe, do I? People in comas can still breathe. No, but you understand what I'm saying about breathing? That there's a lot of stuff we do behaviorally that if it were to be a decision made on argumentation, then you're right. We have to have assumptions. But it's not something that is contingent on argumentation, right? Can we make that distinction? Let's find common ground to agree on first, so we are making sure that we're making progress discursively. So there is a distinction, right, between behaviors which are not predicated on beliefs and affirmations which require you to make statements, which of course imply agreement with those statements or belief in those statements. So can we agree that behaviors are not necessarily predicated on beliefs? Why is it so slow for you to answer? This should be really quick. Okay, thank you. So now we're getting progress. When you ask what makes a paradigm intelligible, only certain aspects of a paradigm are intelligible. Those aspects that are predicated on argumentation. And what makes those aspects of the paradigm that are predicated on argumentation intelligible? Well, there are two different metrics by which we determine validity or a desire. Yeah, come in.
Okay, I'm off in a few minutes.
All right, let me mute this. Okay, so here's the deal with these mattresses that we're getting rid of. Apparently, the garbage people will come and pick up the mattresses from your house, but strangely, they won't get them if they're stained or wet. So we have to make sure that when we put them out on Wednesday night, that we put them out after the sprinklers have gone off, but before 5:30 in the morning. Or remember to turn the sprinklers off Wednesday night because my dad's going out of town. These are the sort of ESTJ realities that consume much of my father's attention. You know, we're throwing out a couple of mattresses. The amount of TE that has gone into throwing away these two mattresses is phenomenal. You're not asking for my epistemology broadly. I'm asking for what it is that makes your worldview intelligible. What is a metaphysical foundation that contextualizes all facts or dependency states? You really are a smart one. You're not a faker at all. I thought you were a faker at first. Well, I mean, I've deferred those matters to a magical thinking frame. That's why I don't have to deal with them. Basically, God and Jesus. Because that way, if I allow that basic premise, then I can work from it meaningfully. That makes everything slabby. It makes me have a destiny and a purpose. And it allows me to not have to devote what would be an entire life's worth of attention trying to figure out that matter myself. I just say, there are no universals as far as positive moral indications, only universals as far as negative moral indications. And I'm just going to have faith that God will provide both directionality and purpose and destiny for me. And if you want me to defend it argumentationally, I just say I defend it on an ontological level. I say it's what's best for me as a being. I'm not telling you to believe that, you know. I'm anti evangelism. Does that answer your question? I've ceased avoiding it. Okay, you successfully pinned me down. Congratulations, by the way, for that. That's not easy to do. Congratulations. I'm very impressed and surprised because I didn't expect you to get clearer. I expected you to get less clear. What's the root cause of the decay of civilization? It's those damn Myahs. Remember? It's those damn Myahs. It's the people who started playing golf wearing flip-flops. They are the ones who are causing civilization to fall into a state of decay and disrepair. Changing social mores mostly. You know what it is? Things used to be one way, and now they're different. And that really bothers me. That's what's causing civilization to decay. Change. You know, rejecting the old ways, replacing them with new social mores. Have you ever noticed the way that social mores change? I have. I'm Andy Rooney. It seems like it used to be girls wore a lot more clothes. I liked it better that way. I'm Andy Rooney. That's what, like when sluts are killing civilization, it's just basically Andy Rooney. I'm Andy Rooney. It used to be, if a girl slept with you, you could wantonly shame her the next morning and she'd go right along with it. I liked it better that way. I'm Andy Rooney. Andy Rooney is just Jerry Seinfeld, but 88 years old, Don't you hate it when you go to a store and you see there are women there buying tools? Tools aren't for women. Tools are for men. It used to be you only see men at the hardware store. I liked it better that way. I'm Andy Rooney. Andy Rooney had two basic positions in life. Don't you hate it when, and have you ever been to, or have you ever noticed those? Those are his basic things. Everywhere he went, it was that all day long. We go to the coffee shop. Hi, Mr. Rooney, welcome. The usual? Have you ever noticed that I always get the usual? I have. I'm Andy Rooney. Yes, Mr. Rooney, we know. Here's your coffee. Don't you hate it when there's not enough cream in the creamer bottle? Is that the case now, Mr. Rooney? No, but don't you hate it when that's the case? I do. Well, I'm Andy Rooney. Do I think the election was stolen? No. The thing is, what I think about the election is, before I think the election was stolen, I'd have to find the results suspicious, which I don't. The results seem perfectly plausible given the both breadth and depth of hatred towards Trump in this country. It's not that Biden was elected because people like him. It's that there are more anti-Trump signs than there are pro-Trump or pro-Biden signs combined. Do I think the election was a high point in American democracy? No. We elected somebody with dementia. That's not good. It's not like Biden's qualified to be president either. Do you remember Paul Harvey? I do, but I didn't really listen to him much, so I don't have a lot of Paul Harveyisms. It's funny, my dad is staying at this place, this resort at the desert this week called Lawrence Welk. Lawrence Welk apparently owned a bunch of resorts and stuff, but for younger people, they may not even know who he is or recognize the name. The reason I know who he is because my grandmother was a religious Lawrence Welk watcher. Every night in the evening, Lawrence Welk was on some channel, and okay, Paul Gray. Where do you live? See, the thing is, everybody tends to extrapolate from their immediate experience and assume the rest of the country is like that. I agree. Nobody voted for Biden. There were 2 votes. Votes for Trump and votes against Trump. No, I'm acknowledging that it was going to be relatively close. But the country really is split fairly in half, you know? If Trump had won, it wouldn't have shocked me. I wouldn't have thought he'd stolen the election. If Biden won, wouldn't have shocked me. Wouldn't think he'd stolen the election. The thing is, though, what I would know is this. If somebody claimed the election was stolen before there was evidence, and then looked for reasons to justify that conclusion, well, we shouldn't pay any attention to those people. It's just a waste of time, you know? In other words, we have almost infinite number of possible kinds of things to investigate, right? There is a percentage chance that this election was stolen for Biden, in favor of Biden. And so there's a percentage chance of just about anything you could state, right? Therefore, we have to apply some sort of discretionary standard as to what comprises good reasons to look into something, what comprises good reasons for suspicion, what comprises adequate evidence to continue supporting suspicion, what comprises adequate evidence to prove something, and what comprises good basic background reasoning. So the idea that the mainstream media, quote unquote, is some sort of monolith that agrees with each other about what's right is not true. That's just not the way it works. It is true. You will see plenty of lazy news outlets basically cop the warrants from other people's articles. So, for example, when the mainstream media was falsely portraying the lab release hypothesis as a wild conspiracy, none of the things they were saying in those articles were lies. They quoted 2 scientists, both of whom had their own position on the matter, and most of the articles all quoted the same 2 scientists with the same 2 warrants. No lies. There weren't any lies in the article. I was able to determine that their interpretation, that it was a wild conspiracy theory, was fucking appallingly ill drawn. And I was able to show that, in fact, they should be ashamed of themselves. Within a couple of weeks of me doing it, New York Times did it. Same thing. So, what do we see here? What do we see? The mainstream media is not lying. The mainstream media comprises a bunch of regular people, many of whom are probably self-identifying as more left than right. But the problem is not that there's some sort of conspiracy to spread lies. It's that this mass hysteria, conjoined with the pattern of back and forth disinformation protocols by both sides. It's like it's not like you're speaking truth, right? You're not being reasonable. You're not saying let's take a reasonable stance on this election matter. Let's excise the possibility that the mainstream media is all colluding to lie to everybody. Because if you're like me, you read shit from a shit ton of different media outlets, from Reason Magazine to YouTube channels to the New York Times to Pasadena Star News to Arcadia Tribune. You read all kinds of shit. And each of those stories is written by a different individual human being, not somebody who's part of a grand conspiracy. Not somebody who's part of a grand conspiracy, right? It doesn't mean that some individuals don't have political interests. Some individuals don't have political agendas. Just like each of those individuals has a political agenda as well. And you are correct. Some of those people's political agendas can be as blindly totalized as your own. And that's a shame. You're right. You will never successfully stop the cycle of killing by killing your way out of it. Stop being the problem. The problem isn't A or B. The problem is insisting on being A or B instead of focusing on what's correct in a given instance. Once a bitch, always a bitch, I guess. See, I don't believe that. I just think people can change. Who's ordering them? See, Legends Fall, if you genuinely believe you can intuit that, there's no evidence of that. None whatsoever. If you genuinely believe that you can make that claim based on your intuition, then you need to go slap yourself hard. It's just unacceptable. Then who's giving the marching orders to whom? Here I am making media. Nobody's telling me to say this, and yet I'm opposing you. Isn't it possible that some of these people in the mainstream media are also making way too many assumptions and are just wrong rather than following some marching orders? I think you're completely full of shit. Nobody tells me to think that. Do you think that somebody has told me to think this? Do you think that somebody has told me to say this? You think I'm more gullible than you, so I bought into some mainstream media lies that you see through that I don't, even though I have a long history of deep-pantsing bullshit? Are you crazy? Leaf Trimmer, Google News is an aggregator. God. Okay, well, let me pull up a video to make a point here, okay? To make a point, an important point. When I looked at where is it? Where's the thing about where's COVID from? Surveying the arguments. Okay. So
Hello.
on this video here, let's look at which things I looked at as evidence. So here's something from Bloomberg. Now, I'm using this as an example of how the mainstream media is drawing conclusions that are not justified from the evidence they're providing. So I'm critiquing Bloomberg in this instance, okay? Now, I'm looking at Scientific American. And again, I'm critiquing the defense of the conventional view when I'm going through Scientific American. Next, I'm showing how NPR is even on board with this bullshit. So I'm again critiquing NPR. I'm saying NPR is not arguing correctly. Next, I go to Google Scholar and I open up the actual study, which is titled Phylogenetic Supertree Reveals Detailed Evolution of SARS-CoV-2. Now, this is a peer-reviewed study, not any media outlet, right? Have you ever tried using Google Scholar? Kind of helps. The next one I went to is abstract of a different one called COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 preprints from MedRxiv and BioRxiv. Again, a peer-reviewed study about the actual genetics and bio stuff of it. Then I go to a Business Insider article that also calls it a myth to critique the Business Insider article. Okay, I highlight certain sections of it and point out how the conclusions they are drawing are not justified by the facts they're presenting. Not that they're lying. They didn't present any false facts. They just drew incorrect conclusions from them because those facts didn't comprise adequate justification for the conclusions they were drawing, because we can tell those kind of things when we think correctly. Okay? So now I critique Yan. Yan is one who was really in favor of it being a lab release. And remember, my position in this video is that it's probably a lab release. And I explain how Yan's paper is all bullshit, because I looked at the paper itself and I point out and I highlight and point to where this kind of shit proves she has an agenda and that she's not actually evaluating the data honestly. And this paper is bullshit, even though it's supporting my side, right? Because I'm making an actual calculus about this. Next, after I looked at Yan's paper, I go to an article by a gentleman who writes about the intelligence community, like military intelligence community and stuff, and kind of behind the scenes foreign policy stuff. And he explains, he does this flow chart here of possible variations, the various permutations of possible ways shit happened, right? Just laying it all out very concretely. And then indicates why, and it shows clearly why there are more factors that would indicate a lab release. And it's a convincing argument. And I explain why it's a convincing argument. And then he has a litany of genuine anomalies that are relevant but not conclusive, and presents them as such, relevant but not conclusive, such as scientific papers with incoherent data and finding, unexplained gaps, inconsistencies, and contradictions. This is regarding the Chinese credibility. Meaningless and twisted chronologies, illegitimate non-transparency, elimination and distortion of records and databases, obscuring and possible destruction of existing viruses, pressure put on disobedient scientists, physicians, and officials, disappearance of key persons, expedient interchangeability between military defense and civilian biochem institutions or something like that. It's behind my shoulder. I can't read it. But the point is, those are examples of good warrants to conclude that we ought not take the Chinese narrative at face value. You see how he has successfully warranted his position. So I said, this is a good argument. Not conclusive, but definitely indicative that a preponderance of the evidence suggests one thing and not the other. Okay? That's how you think well. I go through the rest of this article and explain that then I go back to the NPR and I show how NPR conflates two separate issues. On the one hand, they say that these two things are both wild conspiracies. One, that the Wuhan virus is lab release, wild conspiracy. And two, that the election was stolen, wild conspiracy. And I explain how NPR is correct about one of those things and incorrect about the other. that, in fact, the election being stolen is not a wild conspiracy, whereas the election being stolen is a wild conspiracy, whereas the lab release is not. Coronaviruses exist in nature, and I go through National Geographic and their analysis of COVID's origins, and they actually do some good explaining. Again, mainstream media, good explaining of how normally when something does come from natural origin, we can identify the animal species that it came from, and that's not the case with COVID, right? So that's an example of mainstream media providing good, true information. Note, in all of this, I have seen mainstream media draw a lot of hasty conclusions and make wrong interpretations, and I have not encountered any instances of lies. Have you done this work? Then I go back and critique further Yan's paper and say how this is why it's important for people to be correct about their reasoning, not their conclusions. I don't want you being on the same side as me about a conclusion if you haven't thought it through properly. Then you're just going to muddy it and make me look bad. So Yan can suck it. Yan's the big enemy here, right? And yet she's the one who pushed the idea out into public consciousness. I go back to the original Bloomberg article, and I go back to a more recent Bloomberg article, and it acknowledges that, in fact, there's some credence to the theory, maybe. And it's the one mainstream media source that did take a more measured approach to it, it turns out. And then I go back and slam NPR some more, and then I yammer on about some stuff. Okay, so what kind of sources did I access, and how did I engage with those sources? No, I agree with you, Paul Gray. It doesn't matter whether the virus was man-made or not. It does matter that our media outlets don't jump to hasty conclusions and paint false interpretations from the facts they present. It does matter that people who want to critique the mainstream media critique it correctly. The mainstream media is not a monolith lying to us. It does sometimes have herd mentality, like people do themselves. Nope, not all those mainstream articles were garbage. Not true, right? I'm not trying to find half-decent. No, leaf trimmer, again. I mean, if to the extent that mainstream media is garbage, for the reasons you say, you are the gross water at the bottom of the garbage can. The point is, Paul Gray, the problem is you are the water at the bottom of the garbage can. Why? Because it is not liberals that are the problem or conservatives that are the problem. It is people thinking the matter of who believes what is more important than what's correct. So I presented the correct way to talk about that. Doesn't matter what side you're on, what team you're on. Being on a team is the problem. You are part of the cancer that is the actual thing that's killing civilization. Unlike during the Civil War, there's nothing that we really strongly disagree about. It's all just a bunch of map-based, whipped-up frenzy. By and large, every person in America goes through their day with the same fundamental values. They treat each other with courtesy. They pay for what they get. They don't commit crimes. They take their kids to school. They pick them up, yada, yada, yada. And then they have massive fights over this pretend thing. No, Myah is to blame. No, Myah is to blame. It's those dirty Myahs, I tell you. You are choosing to delegate the adult responsibility to engage in productive discourse to the most childish part of yourself. And shame on you for doing so. And you've made me stand up now as well. You've left me no choice. The indignation has brought my hands to my hips and my self to my feet. I've got the big eyes of, oh no, you don't, and the scowling look of agonized, shocked disappointment.
Wow.
I find the disappointment that I feel in you right now shockingly agonizing. So could you please knock off being so wrong? It's a fair request, don't you think? I'd say it is. As fair as a fair-haired maiden chewing on candy she bought at the fair. Candy? Candy? If you want a good laugh, gotta check out Baki. Baki is a strange anime.
I'd say.
Candy. It's about an idiot and how cool his idiotic ways are. It's an idiot surrounded by other idiots, all being idiotic continually.
Out of all the like nakedness of anime or whatever you want to call it, that lovemaking scene was the most graphic.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that show was, it's like, it couldn't be any more as though a 12-year-old boy wrote it. Your stereotypical 12-year-old boy. The basic writing style is, and then, pow, and then sexy, and then big muscles, and then pow, pow, and then Yeti, mysterious Yeti.
So glad you brought that up.
Teaching a kid how to do a backflip is now child abuse? Well, only if you fail to teach it to them. Like, you teach them wrong, I guess. And they backflip onto their head. Then you weren't being very careful. I mean, the thing is, I was raised in a time when parents were very, very not careful. There were no helmets when you rode your bike. There was no safety equipment at all. We rode our skateboards down steep hills. There was no safety equipment at all. And when we weren't expected home for some reason, we were expected to be out playing unsupervised out in the world. The world is no longer like that. People are a lot more attentive to how their children spend their time. I think that children are no longer considered just the natural part of your 20s like they once were, like everybody spends their 20s raising their children through their 30s, and then in their 40s, their children move out, and then, they got another 15 years, and then they retire. It used to be like that, but we've become excessively feminized. I mean, speak for yourself. I like to say I am transgender, but I go from slightly womanly to incredibly manly and back again. I wouldn't call myself feminine. And frankly, I think you're being too hard on yourself, Legends Fall. I wouldn't call you especially feminine either. I mean, obviously way more feminine than me, but I don't think Legends Fall is that girly, do you?
No, I know.
He says he and his friends, we've become excessively feminized. I told you a long time ago, Legends Fall, you guys shouldn't start wearing makeup. It's a gateway drug to girliness.
Yeah.
You should have never started in the first place.
Yeah.
Eric, are you far left satanic cabal denier? I mean, I guess it would depend what the satanic cabal requested of me as to whether I would deny them it or not. It's just the increasing rates of child kidnapping. Okay, do you really believe that kidnapping rates are increasing? Like, what makes you think more people per capita are being kidnapped now than, say, 20 years ago in America? Is that really true? I once heard an SJW tell me that physical exercise encourages toxic masculinity. Well, I once heard some lady tell me that basically women's lib is the root cause of the decay of civilization. So people say all kinds of crazy nonsense. I've heard apparently some Muslims say that if you draw a picture of Muhammad, that justifies them doing violence to you. Talk about a crazy notion, right? That's insane. I've heard some people say, believe it or not, that Trump was a good president. Now, the thing is, I am not a leftist at all. I do not self-identify as a Democrat. Even though I despise Trump, I'm still glad it wasn't Hillary. Okay? So the thing is, no matter how much you prefer Trump over Hillary, no matter how much you prefer Trump over Biden, if you are a sane human being, you acknowledge that Trump was not and would never be a good president. It's fine to say he's the least of the evils. I respect that. To think he's a good president is to have set expectations so low for this country that I would consider you downright unpatriotic. If that's your standard for a good president, you are expecting way, way, way too little of your presidents. He is, after all, without any question, doubt, nobody can defeat me in this argument. He is a stone cold, cold-blooded murderer. That's what that assassination of that Iranian general was. Completely no legal justification for it at all. He's a stone cold murderer. I
totally forgot about that.
And you think he was a good president? Well, you're setting the bar way too low. That's the best thing I can say about you. If you think Trump was a good president, is that you're setting the bar way too low.
Little fly, how'd you get here? We bleached the whole place.
I mean, that's the thing, Legends Fall. I am not so dumb as to totalize like that. I don't pill. I'm correct about each thing. I don't take a pill to avoid having to actually parse out individual things. I do my actual job as a human being to make decisions about individual stuff and not take a pill to replace that decision-making process. Exactly, notion slave. Exactly. Obama talked out of one side of his mouth to the public and talked out the other side of his mouth to the insider government shit, right? Obama was terrible. Obama burdened us with the worst of all possible worlds regarding a healthcare situation, right? It's not a rational framework. I have a meta-rational framework, Paul Gray. That's why I self-identify as a Christian. Christianity is not a rationalist position. No, Trump is not a saint compared to Obama. Trump is just as bad as Obama in different ways. In other words, Obama did more damage in some areas. But Trump did more damage in other areas. And that's the truth. No, Lee Trimmer, you're not a Christian. After all, there's no forgiveness in you. There's no sense that individuals be excused from your group label so that you can evaluate them as human beings. Nothing Christian about that. So don't get sanctimonious with me, Mr. Hate-Filled Groupist. I am not mischaracterizing your position. Your position is that the election was stolen, and you've refused to engage anything I've said about it, which suggests it's totalizing. It's subsumed your capacity to reason. It's subsumed your willingness to acknowledge that all public policy matters need to be adjudicated across a metric that is universalizable. That it is not okay to have a public policy position that doesn't validate, because after all, public policy is what you're trying to force on everyone. Therefore, we have to validate it argumentationally. It's different than, say, something like who you want to go out with. You don't need to validate that argumentationally. I don't need to prove that Rachel provides the most value to me in order to go out with her and choose her as my woman. I do need to prove that a given policy prescription is a good idea for everyone, though, before I advocate that it be forced on everyone. So that's why it's the process that matters more really than the outcome. The problem here is not what you believe, it's how you believe. In other words, your agenda first, argument second. That's backwards. I say you're not a true Christian, Leaf Trimmer. So you're not acting like a true Christian. Not that you're not a true Christian. You're not acting like one. To follow in the footsteps of Christ is to disavow your groupist bullshit. You know, what is the parable when he says, let he who is without sin throw the first stone? That parable is about saying this. Remember, just because she validates as wicked under this frame, don't allow that to totalize your frame of reference. Under other frames, you are just as wicked. And remember the fundamental equivalency of these frames in at least certain larger frames. And then people go, oh, right, I've totalized my frame of reference, and I'm thinking because I oppose sin, it's okay to stone this woman to death. It's not. Now I recognize I'm guilty of the same thing that she's guilty of, namely being frame locked and prioritizing the wrong thing. So let's say she really wanted that souvenir from her visit to Aramea, where they speak Aramaic. So she stole it from the gift shop. Well, she prioritized the wrong drive there, right? The drive to want it. I'm not a centrist. What makes you think I'm a centrist? You haven't asked me what my policy positions are. I talked to you about process over conclusions. And what do you insist on doing? Try to put me in a box without any data that would justify placement in that box. Ask me policy questions if you want to evaluate if you want to find out which box I fit in. You haven't asked me any policy questions. You have no reason to conclude that. Once again, you're using the wrong process to draw conclusions. So, because it's a matter of public policy, there is one acceptable process and all the others are unacceptable. In other matters, it's not that way. But with public policy, it is that way. It is important that you be rational and discursively honest. Be intellectually honest. Be honest with yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror and go, I am filled with hate. And it's not helpful. I am a problem admirer, and it's not helpful. I have totalized an agenda against the group, and it's not helpful. Do that. Man up. Stop being so feminized. He's not a group, Leaf Trimmer. I do hate Trump. I hate Trump because he disrespected the office of the presidency. He shat on the good checks and balances of democracy. He attempted to eliminate those checks and balances by empowering himself like a king. And he denied the rightful will of the voters in replacing him in the election. But note what's most important. I didn't say don't hate bad guys. I said don't hate groups. Trump's not a group. I can hold him individually responsible for his own bad actions. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying Trump's bad because he's a white man. I'm not saying Trump's bad because he has hair replacement. I'm not saying Trump's bad because he's too short or too tall or too fat or too skinny or anything like that. I'm saying Trump's bad because of his bad behavior. I am perfectly justified in judging him and condemning him thereof. You know? That's a totally different matter. Should I forgive him if he seeks remorse? If he expresses remorse and seeks forgiveness, yes. I haven't heard any remorse from him, any willingness to acknowledge his own delusions, any willingness to acknowledge that he too needs to be subject to critique, any willingness to be critiqued or respond to critique in an honest fashion. So no, I don't forgive him. He can go fuck himself. I'm not Jesus.
It's a good quote.
But I won't hate everybody who's part of his group. I won't say because Trump's evil, therefore all men over the age of 70 are evil. I won't say I hate Trump, therefore all people with orange hair are evil. I won't say I hate Trump, therefore New Yorkers suck. That's the difference between you and me. They must not really be very happy that Trump bought those towers in New York, huh?
They never were.
Because he doesn't have very good taste, is the thing. He's got bad aesthetics.
Yes. Do you know how gaudy it is?
That may be his worst crime of all. He thinks he's classy, but he's really trashy.
Yeah, like, okay, so the Trump Tower, like where his businesses are, is like this. It's like fucking in the middle of Broadway.
And everything gold plated in here. She look classy.
The Trump Tower.
Look like I got ivory, gold plated shit.
Gold
I got
everywhere.
big portrait painting and oil paint of me over there on the wall, looking important. I got the best people doing everything here. I got Joe. He's the best at his job, and he's over there waxing my dick. You're fired.
Yeah, exactly. You're fired.
Who is this idiot? Hey, I'm Donald Trump. I just go through life with a single strategy. I'm super fucking entitled. I never listen to anybody, and I just do what the fuck I want, and somehow everything happens like I want it to. It's amazing. What's wrong with you? You disagree with me? Evil. So, I support the real Americans, my rabid fans. The rest of you fucks can go fuck yourself. But you're the president of the United States of America. I don't give a fuck. I just tweet insults at you. I mean, who would vote for that guy? The only reason anybody would vote for him is if he were up against Hillary Clinton or Dementia Biden.
Biden didn't even run.
I mean, he ran, but he just didn't have to do anything in the campaign because of COVID. He just won.
I meant.
I'm not talking about the previous election. Yeah. I'm talking about this one.
Oh.
I mean, the thing is, the thing is, I am perfectly fine with anybody saying I had no choice but to vote for Trump twice. Perfectly fine with that. I agree. The other choices weren't any better. But to conflate that into thinking that Trump is something better than a D- president at very best is to just shoot reality in the head and bury it as deep in the ground as you can so you never have to look at it again. You are crazy if you think Trump was even a remotely good president. Worst president since Andrew Jackson. Not because he was conservative, but because he was a complete fucking moron.
Yeah. It was really interesting traveling to Europe at the time of when Trump was president, because, like, I've never felt more like a tourist in my whole life. Like, people ignored us like the plague. Unless we were talking to other Americans who were, like, on our tour, no one was engaging with us, like, whatsoever. It was strange. I mean, I had a great trip. I mean, maybe partially because no one came up to us, but...
Leif Schumer says Andrew Jackson was a great president. Now, here's the thing.
A lot of
If you, Leif Schumer, listen, if you really believe that Andrew Jackson was a great president, then I want you to put the chains around the necks of the Native American children and women and drag them down the trail of tears.
Oh, that's such a bad mark on your...
As they die, just toss them on the side of the road, okay? I want you to be the one who does that. Remember, Andrew Jackson implemented that policy by doing what? By disobeying the Supreme Court order to the contrary. He ignored the balance of powers, just like Trump would, ignored checks and balances, ignored the legitimate jurisdiction of the presidential office, and did whatever the fuck he wanted like a king. If you think we should have a king, then you like Trump and you like Andrew Jackson. If you think we should have a president who shits on citizen democracy, then you like Trump and you like Andrew Jackson. And if so, you're lucky to live in such a wonderful citizen democracy that people like you can express your opinion without creating a totalitarianism that would preclude you from doing so further. I mean, how much more thoroughly do I have to completely slam the fuck out of you before you get the point? You would never do the things you claim to support. I hope you would never do the things you claim to support. I hope you would never murder an unsuspecting person in cold blood by shooting a missile at them. I hope you would never drag women and children without enough water and food hundreds of miles down a path until most of them die and toss their bodies by the road. I hope you would never do that. That is not a straw man. That is not a straw man, Leif Schumer. There is no straw man there. You said Andrew Jackson was a good president. I pointed out a concrete reason why he's a bad president and pointed out that you would never have supported that policy. That comprises in and of itself sufficient reason to call him a fucking asshole and a hateful man who disobeyed the Supreme Court and caused a fundamental damage to the American democracy and our constitutional system democracy. The court has its jurisdiction and the presidency has his. He has to respect that or he's acting like a king. That's not okay. Nothing straw man about that. That's a concrete, specific, and definitive conclusive reason to agree with me that Andrew Jackson was a fuck. Don't misportray my argument as weak when it is incredibly powerful. That just means not only are you wrong, but you're incredibly bad at evaluating arguments.
Leif Schumer, we love you, but you're bringing us down.
Is that LCD Sound System song?
Yeah, it's in my head.
Although I gotta say, the thing is, there's a lot of clippable stuff here, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I'm at my best when I'm getting a flurry. You know, I read a story as a kid. I remember it was about a boy who, it's something called Tasmanian Devil, maybe. And it was a boy who was a skinny boy, but he was learning boxing at the local Y. And he never really felt like he got it down. And then one day he gets into a fight at school, and finally it happens. That flurry where you're supposed to get that little bag, go. So he got a flurry until he watched as the bully goes down behind him, right? Well, it sort of takes the metaphysical equivalent to me of seeing bullying. Now, if I see bullying, it makes me want to do something. If I hear words that suggest somebody is engaged in the wrong thinking process or saying something stupid, like it makes me want to do something. It makes me want to step in and say, it's not okay for you to bully. It's not okay for you to think badly about public policy. It's the same sort of feeling I have. And just like the kid in the story, when motivated thusly, I tend to produce some of my best flurries of argumentation. And they're really compellingly convincing. Like the fact that you still disagree with me or still say, whenever red pills is going to be a really dramatic shift or whatever, means you have shut down. You've got, you're in your bunker. You're Hitler in the bunker, still pretending like there's forces out there, moving them around on a board, but it's just pretend. Because you have been handed a platter of truth that smells strongly of your defeat. It's time to gorge upon it. Oh, that's funny.
What's funny?
I like being a scoldy windbag, And sir,
I was just wondering, like, did that ever happen when you were a teacher? That you would like go?
Oh yeah, I love being scoldy windbag.
I'm just like imagining going down the hallways and hearing your voice from outside of the classroom. Oh my god, I would be dying.
But like I said, somebody's got to prompt it. It's not out of the blue.
No, it's not.
Somebody does something to piss me off.
Yeah.
Says something like, I can't let those ugly, ugly, awful, trashy words sit there unresponded to.
I'm not saying that you should. I think you're the best person too.
I agree. You know why? Because I'm incredibly woke. As a transracial, transgendered, transageal, transparadigmal human, hue per child. I'm a hue per child. I prefer not to use gendered pronouns.
Gen X?
I'm a hue per child. I'm transgenerational as well.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm everything from Gen Y to millennial to silent generation to the greatest generation to Gen X to baby boomer.
I can't wait to learn.
I'm all of those things.
Surprise every day.
And as such a transy person, now granted, my transgenderism only goes from incredibly manly to slightly womanly. It never goes below that, really, in terms of the woman section. I guess it should go side to side because women aren't below men, But anyway, regardless.
Oh, you're feeling like a man now.
Well, what I'm saying, Rachel, is that I have enough transgenderism in me to understand the woman's perspective. I'm not just man.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
That's what makes me humanity's single most woke person. I got awarded it 3 years running now. Humanity's single most woke person.
We have a single most woke person trophy winner, and we have a kitty pageant winner.
And of course, as a transracial person who shifts race fluidly, day to day, moment to moment, I know the suffering of every racial minority group. I've internalized it. I also know the privilege of every racial majority group. I've internalized it, and they cancel each other out.
I have a question.
Yes?
Before, when you were just getting shouty, I don't know. Is that how it is?
Let's call it scoldy.
Scoldy! When you were getting scoldy, what race were you?
Well, I don't remember. Because, of course...
Sounds very German.
See, the scoldiness isn't relevant to the race. So typically in any given moment, I may not be paying attention to what race I am. I do remember, I think I was briefly Bulgarian during that.
Oh.
But I think I went into and out of Bulgarian. I think I was Albanian for a while, but I don't know where my hat was.
Why?
I'm not sure. Read the above messages. Okay. Do I look enthusiastic about it? Ghostwriter just wants to smoke a bowl. She just woke up. Let's smoke a bowl, guys.
Yeah, let's smoke a bowl.
Let's stop fighting that shit.
All right.
Let's
Rider.
stop arguing and fighting about how wrong you are.
Ghost
Right?
Rider, have you smoked your bowl yet? I'll smoke with you.
Now, he didn't like his work as a founding father, sure. Because, see, the difference is his slave owning wasn't part of his public servant job. Unlike Trail of Tears, which was. See the big difference? It's like, I don't care that Clinton was a philanderer and a cheater when I evaluate him as a president. If he embezzled public money, I'd say he was a terrible president. If he got a blowjob from Monica Lewinsky, I'd say that's irrelevant. Because one thing is relevant to his performance as a president, and the other is not.
Ow, I think I have a calorie.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Let's wait forever.
No, actually, let's try to get a bundle. Okay, we'll mention this too. I want to bundle this in here. I'm not Hitler in my bunker. What are you talking about? Well, I mean, that's assuming you're just evaluating him against previous presidents. I'm evaluating him against how the office ought to be held and executed. The only president you'll hear me generally say positive things about, contemporary president, is Clinton. And the main reason I feel mostly positive about Clinton is because he really didn't do a whole hell of a lot and just let the country run itself. The only thing he did of note is NAFTA, and I think that was a good thing.
Oh my God, I forgot it.
Also, he did a great job of freeing those American prisoners from North Korea that time.
Yeah.
Wasn't that cool? Then they make you go like, fuck yeah, Clinton.
Oh my gosh, my bowl is so resiny. I have to wash.
Well, you want to get a new bowl? I think we have a new one for you. I need to order some more bowls.
You think it? Yeah.
Here you go.
Aw, thank you.
We even have one more after this.
Cool. Thanks.
In that analogy about hiding in the bunker, what I'm saying is, regarding all these arguments, I have firebombed your Dresden, and you're still pretending to go to stores and purchase things there. Okay? There aren't any more stores, just charred corpses. Hey, buddy, I just firebombed your Dresden. Wake up and realize it. It's a good expression. I just firebombed your Dresden.
What's Dresden?
Dresden is a German city in World War II that the Allies firebombed, basically as punitive retaliation against Nazi Germany. In other words, Dresden was a beautiful medieval city that had no meaningful strategic role in the war, but because Germany was shooting rockets at London willy-nilly, trying to kill people in London, and the Blitz, as they called it. The British in particular were determined to get even. And so they won the argument amongst the Allied forces that, yes, we'll firebomb Dresden. The reality is the firebombing of Dresden was the most morally reprehensible thing in World War II, more so than Hiroshima or Nagasaki. You can easily argue that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were necessary to break the ironclad lock that the Japanese paradigm had on all of their people. So in other words, their version of communitarianism and their hierarchical paradigm and stuff worked so well that the whole nation was ready to fight to the death, every man, woman, and child, until the nukes happened. So, I mean, a lot of people would argue that the nuclear bombs in World War II were not morally justified. I would argue that they were, but that the firebombing of Dresden definitely wasn't, and that it's the greatest shame that we should all take away from World War II. That we let that happen, because of course the thing is, why were we fighting? Why were we fighting the Nazis in the first place? Because they were the kind of fucks who shot rockets randomly at London to just blow up civilians. That's why we were fighting them. Exactly the same thing with the groupists, right? The same failure to be reciprocal in your burdens. In other words, if my justification for fighting you is that you guys are bad, then I can't be a bad guy. Right? It's just that simple. If my justification for fighting this group is that they're horrible and groupist, then I can't be groupist. You know? Because it means I'm invalidating my own justifications.
What part of Washington did we go to when we visited Hambone?
It was called Hambonia, Washington, I think.
Cool.
No, it was called what city did Hambone live in? I forget. It was called. Look, as far as the border goes, as far as immigration policy goes, my position on it is this: the United States should have the capacity to execute its immigration policy as it's written. So if, in fact, in the status quo, we cannot successfully control the flow of people across the border, that needs to be addressed. Whether or not we should completely control the flow of people across the border is a secondary question. The question of whether or not we should be able to successfully control the flow of people across the border and let in more or less as we wish should be not under any dispute. So one area where Trump's idea actually was a good idea is, strangely, the much mocked big wall. After all, if we're having a problem not being able to control that border, what's the easiest, simplest, most obvious, and probably most successful way to control the border? Unfortunately, it's build a big wall. So it's like, do I love the idea of building a big wall at the Mexican border? I don't like the symbolic implications of it, right? It's going to send a certain message that's not a very good message. It's reminiscent of things like the Berlin Wall, right? So it resonates as ugly to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But if we want to be logical about the thing, there is, in fact, a necessity for the United States as a sovereign nation to control its borders according to the terms of its laws. In the status quo, we can't do that because we don't actually have control over the southern border. I'm not saying it's the same, Raphael. You need to listen to the words I say. That it evokes thoughts of, it's reminiscent of. So for a lot of people, when you see a big wall keeping those people over there and these people over here, it evokes thoughts of, is reminiscent of the Berlin Wall. I'm not saying it's the same thing at all. Obviously, Mexico is not a totalitarian communist country. We're not a totalitarian fascist country or whatever. This is not the same thing at all. We aren't keeping half of Americans away from the other half of Americans. It's not the same thing. I agree. And also, I was correct with what I first said. It's evocative for a lot of people of and reminiscent of. It draws those kind of comparisons. Now, I don't necessarily think we should build the wall. But what I'm saying is this is an example of being fair and honest and acknowledging that there actually are good reasons to think that building a wall was not a terrible idea. So why do people hate the idea so much? Well, because for whether they knew it explicitly or not, there are a lot of people out there who hated the wall because it hadn't been deliberated properly. That's a very good reason to hate it. Okay, well, let's evaluate all of the considerations of this project idea and discuss whether or not, on balance, it's a good idea. This is the sort of thing we need to evaluate with the utilitarian calculus, because issues of border control are not fundamentally normative issues, in the sense that Mexicans don't have an inherent right to come here. Canadians don't have an inherent right to come here. What makes a sovereign nation sovereign is the fact that it controls its borders. So I'm not saying we should build a wall either. I'm just saying, if somebody wants to say it's important for us to control the border successfully, in other words, to have actual knowledge of who's going over and not, fine, I'll agree with that. So then if you want to say, let's make sure we have a solution so that we really have knowledge of who's crossing the border, okay, fine, let's come up with some solution like that. Then we can talk about what the best solution is. What's the most cost-effective solution? How much margin of error are we willing to tolerate? In other words, how many Mexicans can successfully sneak across the border before we declare a given approach a failure? Is it just one? Or is it have to be, if we catch 95% of them, is that good enough? The other thing is, what do we do with these Mexicans once we catch them? What Trump did was purposefully make their lives miserable. Now, I don't care how much you hate immigration. That's not what a good human being does. Send them back to Mexico, whatever. Don't split up their families. Why? Why are you making life hard for the Mexicans to punish them for their immigration crime? I mean, come on. What's the point? You think you're going to deter them from coming again or something, or deter others? No, just Trump was being spiteful. I don't think anybody could dispute that, really. There's no other justification for his approach towards those captured Mexicans. Why would he split up their families?
Yeah, that was really nasty.
He's already got them incarcerated. He can send them back to Mexico. The thing about public policy is there are a lot of issues in public policy that need to be justified with the utilitarian calculus. The thing about the immigration thing there is it doesn't validate on any calculus. It doesn't validate on a principal calculus, and it doesn't validate on a utilitarian calculus. You're not accomplishing anything by splitting up those families except creating suffering. And it's fundamentally a rights violation because while these people are here illegally, that doesn't mean they committed a crime. A crime has to be committed against person or property. What they did instead was violate an international protocol of border crossing. It's different, So they shouldn't be punished for crossing the border. They should be sent back to Mexico. People should be punished proportional to the damage they do in the crime they commit against a person or property. Since crossing the border doesn't create damage to people or property, in other words, it's not an actual crime, it's instead an illegality. Illegalities and crimes are different things, okay? So, for example, when I get a traffic ticket, I haven't committed a crime, I've committed an infraction. The reason we know it's not a crime is because while I'm driving, I'm subject to strict liability. Strict liability precludes criminal activity because for something to be a crime, I have to have knowledge that I'm committing a crime and a motive to commit the crime, opportunity to commit the crime, so you might be able to establish motive and opportunity if I'm speeding, but you can't establish that I was aware I was committing the crime. I could have accidentally been going too fast, but that doesn't get you out of a ticket. Why not? Because a ticket's not a crime. It's an infraction. That doesn't mean you don't pay a penalty, but it also means that you normally aren't subject to things like incarceration because it's not a crime. Same thing with immigration violations. They aren't really crimes. A Mexican doesn't commit a crime against you or anybody else when they cross the border, except potentially trespassing on private property. I mean, Clayton McCorrick, I'll tell you what's intellectual laziness and downright disingenuousness is pretending like Trump couldn't have fixed the policy, that he couldn't have chosen to execute a policy on immigrants that was humane, that focused on kindness, that prioritized people not suffering. You're pretending as though Trump, as the executive, the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, was just going along with Obama's bad policy. Remember, I'm not an Obama fan. I'm not saying Obama did a good job. I'm not praising Obama. My critique of Trump is not predicated on the idea that he's worse than Obama in any way, shape, or form. So that, what you're doing there, is actually intellectually lazy and disingenuous. That's actually lazy and disingenuous. The United States is not in and of itself a piece of property, but lots of pieces of property comprise the United States, and some of them are public lands, which are under the custodianship of a sovereign, but not the property thereof. And it's important for us to speak precisely about these things. No, leaf trimmer, listen, Trump knowingly, willfully executed this program. Whether he used as an excuse for it that the program had been put in place by Obama or not is irrelevant. He chose to execute it the way he did. To deny that is to be not in reality. You are lying to yourself. I don't believe you're lying to me because obviously I'm not going to believe that bullshit. Okay, so Trump got rid of the catch and release program. In other words, the sensible thing to do, which is catch Mexicans and send them back to Mexico, because we don't want so many Mexicans here, he changed that to catch Mexicans and keep them here. That's what you're telling me? Am I supposed to think that's a good thing? That makes any sense at all? That it doesn't just prove my point? If in fact the problem is we're having to do too much catch and release, and we just keep catching the same ones over again and releasing again, then yes, we need to secure the border better. Securing the border better has nothing to do with locking up Mexicans in the United States. Eric, you have continually dodged my point as to why the separating of alleged families existed in the first place. It was to parse out human traffickers from legitimate families. That is shady. Okay, well, so you're saying the justification was some of you might be human trafficking victims. So we're going to victimize all of you in hopes of preventing a larger victimization that we don't know exists. That's your explanation. It's for your own good, Mexicans. As little Jose is screaming, Mammy, Papi, Mammy, Papi, and Mammy and Papi being dragged away from him, they go, hey, this kid might be a victim of human trafficking. I don't know that his anguished screams are legitimate. He could be acting on behalf of the human traffickers here. Is that what you're saying? We can't trust Mexicans to tell us the truth about whether or not they're being trafficked by simply interviewing them one at a time. We have to lock them in separate cages, far away from each other, even though some of them are little children and the others are their parents. We won't believe when mom, dad, and Jose all say they're a family, because we have to verify it independently. Oh, well, we must have the means to verify that independently at our disposal then, right? No, we don't. So you're telling me you separated this family contingent on you verifying their status as a family without even having the means to do so? Figuring you'll figure out how to verify it later? Are you fucking shitting me? And it doesn't make you puke at your own silliness in defending this shit? You should. You should be vomiting right now. If you're not choking on your own vomit, you aren't disgusted enough with your stupidity.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Wait, Silver, I am not interested in an absurd smear campaign at all. I don't care what other people said about that policy. I'm critiquing it on its merits. Remember, I'm Eric. I don't buy into bullshit. That's why I just argued that the Great Big Wall was actually a pretty good idea. Right? That was a vastly better idea than taking the Mexicans we don't want in America and locking them up here indefinitely. Right? Or are you just plain evil as well as dumb? You're not dumb. You're not evil. You are susceptible to being attached to your position irrationally. I'm trying to break you of that. We can be honest. You don't have to be loyal to somebody who is not worth your loyalty, like Trump or Obama or anybody else like that. Who is worth your loyalty? The person who takes the time to yell the truth at you and explain to you why you shouldn't think like an idiot day after day after day. Me. I care enough to be outraged by your wrongness. If I didn't care about you, I wouldn't get mad.
It's true. The closer you get, the more honest and blunt.
I mean, the thing is, especially Legends Fall is really disappointing because I expect others besides me to be capable of being an adult in their thinking. And that means, maybe you're young, maybe you've not experienced a good president yet. That's not a reason to believe Trump was a good president. No, I don't suggest instant citizenship for those for illegals to break into the USA. I think if you were going to ask me what would my immigration policy be, remembering that I'm not going to be the legislature and that it's not a legislative priority for me, my proposed legislative agenda would be actually lock down the border as we want to, give amnesty to those who are currently here, and from anyone going forward who comes across illegally, catch them before they get too deep in and put them back into Mexico. But ideally, we won't have more people coming in because you got the border locked down properly. I don't want to punish people who are currently here and have successfully snuck in. I'd like to see them get amnesty. I don't want any more people to sneak in because whether or not they should come in or not is one question. Whether they should sneak in is not a question. The answer is no. However, whether it's okay for them to be here once they've snuck in already successfully and been here for a bit, to me, the question on that is also cut and dry. We shouldn't fuck with them. Leave them be. They didn't commit any crime. They just got past our weak-ass border control. That's on us. Now, do you see how that's a nuanced position on the matter? A meaningful, correct position on the matter? Do you understand how now what it sounds like when an adult addresses a topic? I want you guys to emulate that. Try to sound like an adult when you address a topic. That cough doesn't sound good? That cough sounds great because it means that Rachel has been smoking bong rips. And that's something I think a lot of us sometimes forget to do enough of. Failing to smoke bong rips can correlate with talking about politics for too long. It can correlate with being too mad at leaf trimmer. It can correlate with my ongoing slap fight with Legends Fall. So that's why it's important for me to smoke more bong rips. No, you don't, Raphael. Most of the time you don't.
Two things that I'll never forget about your mom. Well, there's multiple things, but one thing was when she handed me the bomb. That was like,
You were sitting outside one day and I don't know, Rachel was sitting there and saying something, and I guess my mom thought she looked like she needed a bong rip.
yeah, she
Here.
handed it to her. Yeah. The other is when the next day after like being here, mom was like, "Oh, we like you so much," and I was just like, "Oh, I like you too."
I don't expect stupidity from you. That's the thing. That's exactly the opposite. I expect you not to say stupid shit. And yet, here we go again. You know? If I expected you to say stupid shit, I just ignore it. I am NI ignoring. The fact that you continually, I'm apparently SI ignoring as well. The fact that you continually say stupid shit doesn't change my optimism. I am still optimistic that I can get better thinking out of you. I have, and that's why I'm disappointed in your position on this.
I was just gonna ask, what's more disappointing, their position or that it's coming from them?
Well, okay, you're asking what's more disappointing, really, leaf trimmer stubbornness or Legends Falls
Yeah.
anomalous area spot of blindness.
Exactly.
So this is a rare. I see this as unusual for Legends Fall to be this blind about something. But you know what? We all get attached to certain things. Like my daughter refuses to talk to me about abortion because I don't just have a single clear pro-abortion position. She doesn't want to talk about the complications of it. She doesn't want to talk about it at all. She's an ESTP, and about that issue, she doesn't want to engage in rational discussion. So it happens, you know. There may be some issue like that for me too, but I can't think of it.
My ex-boyfriend.
Yeah, I mean about public policy. I'm trying to think of a public policy matter that
no. Even
I'm attached to.
Joking. I'm not. No, public policy or open to anything. You're open to most things. Talking about.
Yeah, I'd like to think I'm not. I'd like to think all of my argumentations and positions are driven from an argumentational analysis and not from what I want to be true.
Yeah.
Well, I know, and that's the big problem, Rebecca. Rebecca Talibi points out that politics isn't based on logic. And so the challenge is for somebody who is able to do politics correctly, namely able to think about it and analyze policy correctly, like me, is going to be a rationalist. But that's going to give them trouble when they run for president if all their justifications are reason-based and logic-based, and the people they're talking to don't use those metrics, right? So it's one of the things I'm going to have to work on as a candidate is to make sure that I resonate with people emotionally as well. I think that's actually not going to be that difficult. And the reason is I never learned how to lie. I never learned how to hide my emotions. I never learned how to manipulate with dishonesty, because I have always found it a more successful strategy to own and co-opt my wrongnesses. So it's like own it, change your position, and keep track of the fact that you did so you can use it as an example later, right? So because I think there's a recall election coming. I mean, I agree he's a complete disaster. Newsom could have been a good governor if he had been governor during a time period where the state wasn't trying to do anything or had no things to deal with, because I think he would have basically been perfectly happy just doing a bunch of governor things like stand places, smiling, shaking hands, having a governor's ball. He really liked the idea of being governor like that, like all the fancy fun stuff he's gonna get to do, but he has no concept of how to do policy. He's not a leader. He's a fun guy. He seems like a guy you might want to hang out with, right? But he's definitely not a leader. He was a handsome guy who had done the couple of jobs that normally precede being governor, and so he ran for governor and got elected. And he seemed inoffensive, right? But of course, inoffensive is great as long as the governor doesn't actually have to deal with something. Then COVID came and he fucked it up royally, and now everybody wants to get rid of him. I tell you, the last incarnation of Jerry Brown, he was a good governor. He really was. Despite the fact that California is so left, he prevented a lot of overly leftist bullshit and tried to be a pragmatist, a technocrat of sorts, and did a pretty damn good job of it, frankly. In other words, it's not easy being governor of California because, half of the population is clamoring for irrational socialist shit, I didn't think Schwarzenegger was a bad governor. I thought he was pretty good. Not a lot of stuff happened, That's kind of like a kind of key metric for evaluating executives is, did a lot of stuff happen? If not a lot of stuff happened, then the executive probably did a good job. Because if you're remembering a lot of stuff happening, it means it was a very volatile period. And now it is the case that sometimes a good executive will come in during a very volatile period and be necessary during that very volatile period to resolve a complicated matter, or a clusterfuck of a disaster, or a sinking ship, or whatever. Save your general, as the book says. Well, I'm that president. I'm going to go in there and oversee the return to a stable and sustainable national identity. That's what we've lost. We have lost a sustainable and unifying national identity. No, see, leaf trimmer, then you ignored everything I just said. Remember, there are things that are relevant because they're things that one does in one's capacity as a public servant. And there are things that are irrelevant because there are things that one does not in one's capacity as a public servant. So it wasn't just Trump who killed that Iranian general. It was Trump, the president, who killed that Iranian general. Where it was Schwarzenegger, the guy who cheated on his wife. It was Clinton, the guy who had Monica Lewinsky suck him off. Those are irrelevant questions because they are not demonstrative of abuse of power of the office. Andrew Jackson, again, he has a responsibility as president. So we're evaluating whether or not we ought to be outraged by his performance in the office, okay? Now, the office of president is responsible to respect the Constitution. They make an oath to do so. When Andrew Jackson ignored the orders of the Supreme Court and pushed forward the Trail of Tears, despite the Supreme Court telling him the Constitution sided with the Indians, he broke that oath and defiled the office of the presidency. Right? There's no difficulty here to understand this. It's cut and dry. Clear, bright line. Trump killed as a duty of the execution of the office of the presidency, assassinated, which has multiple more negative impacts than just murder. And it was under the auspices of being the president. When Clinton got a blowjob from Lewinsky, it was not under the auspices of being the president. That was not part of his official duties. It was part of his break. He was taking a blowjob break, right? When Schwarzenegger proved to be a horrible husband and cheated on his wife, he was demonstrating that you don't want him as a husband, not that you don't want him as a governor, right? Okay, so Clayton, again, you're being intellectually dishonest. My example disproved the warrant you were giving. Namely, it wasn't really necessary. It isn't really necessary to separate these people in order to determine whether or not they're victims of human trafficking. It's not necessary to separate a family for an extended period of time to determine if they're victims of human trafficking. If they had been white people crossing the border, and in fact, when Americans do return across the border, they don't lock up the parents and children in a separate cell for a while to determine if possibly the child's a victim of human trafficking. Do they? Why not? Why isn't it possible that somebody human traffics back and forth from America as an American citizen? Why isn't that as possible as Mexicans human trafficking in their crossing the border illegally? So who's being dishonest here? Clinton bombing civilians by the hundred in Yugoslavia in the 90s is sound evidence of his abuse of power by his stature in office. Well, actually, he was participating in a UN peacekeeping operation. It wasn't presidentially directed. So get your facts straight.
FYI, my prescriptions have been filled.
Okay, we'll go get them.
Oh, the ENTP.
So, like, and you see here what Winston's mom says. Zero tolerance meant that migrant families would be separated, and they wanted that to happen because they believed it would deter future illegal immigration, not because they were stopping human trafficking. Is that a legitimate reason to take children from parents? No. Especially since, remember, we want to deter crimes because the criminal is responsible for their own behavior. We are responsible to secure borders because that's the government's job. If we fail to secure our border and somebody crosses it, we have no reason even to know for sure the person knew the border was there. Right? In other words, if there's a giant field of just sort of empty land owned by nobody, let's say, and your land starts, Myah, if you don't put up a fence or a sign or something, you can't accuse me of trespassing. So it works even more robustly in terms of where the burden lies when it comes to a national border. It's the nation's responsibility to secure the border. It is not individuals' responsibilities to respect a border that's unsecured when it comes to national borders. So the idea that we would punish people for breaking the law for entering illegally is just a way of excusing our own selves from fulfilling our own responsibilities to successfully secure the border. If we care that much about people crossing it. You see the dishonesty in the whole thing? Punishing them for our failure? You see the wickedness? Who's responsible to secure the border? Those Mexicans? We're the ones who care about whether or not they come across it. So we better be the ones who secure it. And when we don't take it out on the people whose responsibility is not to secure the border. So hopefully, Clayton, you've understood something now, right? That you've put the onus on the wrong party and you've punished Joe for Bob's failure. You punished the Mexicans for the federal government's failure. And not only that, you cause suffering to completely innocent children and their parents as a means of deterrence. I mean, that's what villains in movies do. Right? As a means of forcing people to go along with their perspective, they'll hold their child hostage, threaten their child, threaten them to deny them access to their child. Have you ever watched the movie Blue Velvet? Trump executed Blue Velvet as an immigration policy. That's some pretty wicked shit. You're making excuses for it, being an apologist for it. You feel the need to take a shower? You should. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for being here, everybody. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.